In his film Encounters at the End of the World, director Werner Herzog suddenly turns his focus to a lone penguin, madly wandering about. The penguin is heading away from his flock toward the desolate, uncharted mountains of Antarctica. To venture into this region means certain death for the little flightless bird, but he must go. If the researchers brought him back to his flock, he would simply hobble off again. He must go. But why? Keep this little penguin in the back of your mind as you watch the rest of this video. Hello and welcome to Kino Therapy, and I'm very excited about today's director. This video's filmmaker exists on a level so eccentric that he defies description. Calling him a madman of cinema ignores so many other wonderful traits he possesses, and reduces all the intricate aspects within him. This director is a rebel, a humanist, a philosopher, a poet, a maverick, an explorer. And a little bit insane. Passionate about life, people, thought, madness, mystery, and truth, only one artist can accurately fit all those categories, and that man is Werner Herzog. A provocateur both in front of and behind the camera, Herzog's behind-the-scenes stories are almost as famous as his films themselves. Herzog is notorious for filming on location in harsh jungle or wilderness settings. This vicariously puts his cast and crew in the mindset of the story. Now, unfortunately, this meant they weren't always working under the best conditions, yet subjecting his team, Herzog managed to capture the sense of realism he was striving for. Herzog refused to use storyboards and encouraged improvisation during shooting, which strengthened the authenticity of the film's world. Herzog didn't want to simply make a film on a studio backlot. He wanted the audience to feel the disconcerting, grimy environment and suffer through the struggles the characters and actors were all going through. Herzog wanted a balance between realism and fiction in his work, which perhaps led to his interest in documentary. Despite the fact Herzog resents absolute realism, he undoubtedly finds some value in familiarity. In his fictional work, Herzog strives to make it real, but in his documentary work, he likes to insert made-up scenarios that aren't true, that didn't actually happen. A crazy contradiction from Herzog, yet this illuminates his storytelling doctrine. I believe Herzog values realism, yet in his mind, an artist should shape the world around them, emphasizing the truth of our world, rather than obstructing it. His dangerous ambition has earned him a notable reputation. While I don't like how this description has boxed him in, Herzog is mostly known for his eccentric filmmaking behaviors. Herzog was driven solely by his desire to make movies. He didn't care what the cost was. From stealing cameras, entering restricted areas, hypnotizing cast members, hiring psychopathic actors, harming animals, Herzog's narrative films took place at the brink of human insanity. Different modes of insanity, some traditionally frightening, others socially acceptable. While frenzied in nature, Herzog's films pose the question why people do what they do, placing it among a grand existential scale. What will people do to find fulfillment? What is fulfillment to them? What happens when they achieve what they wanted, but are still left unsatisfied? These terrifying but earnest questions remain at the core of Herzog's work, dissecting institutionalized and normalized hostility. The content of Herzog's documentaries, on the other hand, is a versatile range of topics, centering on subjects broad and niche.
Try to look a chicken in the eye with great intensity, and the intensity of stupidity that is looking back at you is just amazing.
Whatever he found fascinating at the time, and would apparently appeal to audiences as well. Fictional or documentary makes little difference to Herzog. As long as he got to pick up a camera and capture the intricacies of life, he was fulfilled. The beauty, the ugliness, the wonder, the peril, the enlightenment. Herzog always encouraged us to take a closer look at the world around us. The ugliness within the beauty, and the beauty within the ugliness. Some of his films, typically his fictional work, could be dark and nihilistic, while the documentaries celebrated discovery and people. Herzog actually likens himself more to a writer or poet who accidentally made films. He just uses a camera instead of a pen. Herzog has written 6 books in his career and directed various operas as well. Herzog became known to Western audiences for his iconic voice, often heard narrating most of his documentaries, pondering the mysteries of the universe and topic at hand. He has a way of describing things with great power and wonder, giving life to intangible mysteries that often elude human thought.
This is a vision that exists only in dreams. There is nothing more that should be said. We can only watch in awe.
Has life without fire become unbearable for them? Others, seized by madness, follow suit. Now they are content. Now there is something to extinguish again.
This is what the Mexicans would call pura vida. Life raw, intense, and pure. Life with meaning at its fullest.
Something is looming over this city that will soon be laid waste by war. Now it is still alive, biding its time. Nobody has yet begun to suspect the impending doom.
I asked them, why is it that a sophisticated animal like a chimp does not utilize inferior creatures? He could straddle a goat and ride off into the sunset.
McMurdo has climate-controlled housing facilities, its own radio station,
A bowling alley and abominations such as an aerobic studio and yoga classes.
His narration is more poetic than educational, personifying things that would normally be impossible to personify. His voice is mesmerizing, intelligent, somewhat strange, yet we hear the gentleness inside of him that we realize was present all along. Despite his reputation as a crazy artist, Herzog harbored a deep reverence for mankind. A good example of this comes in his documentary Grizzly Man. In the scene where Herzog listens to audio of a deadly bear attack, he makes the conscious decision not to insert the recording in his film. I feel as if any transgressive director would have jumped at the opportunity for spectacle. But Herzog didn't want to shock or disrespect anyone. He wanted to reach people, not alienate them, and made films detailing life while provoking us in a thoughtful manner. Celebration may not be a verb you'd associate with Herzog, but it was challenging in a constructive way. Herzog could explore the mysteries of the reaches of the world, or the mysteries of the inner human ego. Maddening, intimidating, and nihilistic, yet magnificent and beautiful. Wildly unpredictable, but it was controlled unpredictability. Not even Herzog knew what his finished product would look like, and that's just what he wanted. As long as it captured the honest spontaneity of mankind, he had conveyed his message. Brilliant and austerely natural, Herzog is an incredibly prolific artist who is driven by this hard-headed urge of his. To create, to go on adventures, to depict the worst and best of reality, to experience the ups and downs, the joys and strife of living, and to share his worldview with as many as possible, streamlining it into the minds of everyone. Werner Herzog was born on September 5, 1942, in Munich, Germany. Although shortly after his birth, his family fled to a Bavarian village, seeking refuge from Allied bombs of World War II. Herzog didn't grow up in ideal conditions, living with no electricity or running water. He had no toys, no telephone, and no television. This wild, rural life is perhaps what gave him the courage to venture into exotic locations for his films. Being impervious to struggle, he sought to pursue and capture struggle in his work, turning hardships into art. This childhood made Herzog who he is, as he likened this time to anarchy. He did not see this life as hard, but liberating. Away from civilization, living a rather connected life. While primitive, Herzog developed a sense of freedom, apathetic to what others thought of him. To him, humanity is struggle, which is why he's drawn to stories, real and fictional, of people overcoming impossible odds of survival. They can be rough, but Herzog finds beauty in fortitude and triumph. At age 11, Herzog saw his first film when a traveling projectionist came to his village and screened a reel. He didn't like it. I know, this is the part where I tell you about how the young wide-eyed boy was absorbed by movie magic, and his dream from then on was to make motion pictures. Well, that didn't happen with Herzog. It was a film about Eskimos building an igloo. Nanica the North, maybe? That hasn't been confirmed. But Herzog remembers being greatly disinterested in the film, and initially not wanting to pursue a career of filmmaking. He was, however, interested in stories, people, poetry, and travel. As a teenager, Herzog hiked across Europe and even North Africa, almost dying from an illness. At age 19, Herzog made his first short film, Heracles, a documentary about bodybuilders. Herzog was a good student and studied in the UK and the US, but studying to him was not as integral as doing. Herzog stole his first camera from the University of Munich, which he considers not to be a crime but a necessity, thus marking the first step of one of the most insane careers in filmmaking history. Herzog's feature-length debut showed plenty of signs for what was to come in his future work, the unsuspecting crowd having no clue that they were witnessing the birth of the craziest film career ever. The concept involves an injured German soldier during World War II, stationed in Greece with a couple of comrades. The plot doesn't necessarily contain a strong backbone, as we basically just watch three bored men pass the time with unusual activities. They goof around, hypnotizing chickens, making cockroach traps, odd things to fill your runtime with, to say the least. With that said, the story, or lack thereof, can feel a little difficult to get into. I'll admit at one point I was hoping the antics would cease and something a little more concrete would occur. Luckily the film pays off, revealing every instance was a straw on a camel's back, getting heavier and heavier. Although not clear at first, we realize that there was a subconscious cause and effect to every little emotion we witness. There's a French New Wave inheritance to the filming style, utilizing natural lighting and amateurish camera positions. It traps us in this dingy, ramshackle cell, and we can really feel the heat, dirt, and claustrophobia. Remember, Herzog never used storyboards, so while other films would have a quality of preparedness, Herzog's makeshift mise-en-scene forcefully absorbs the viewer into the dreary, dull, unfiltered setting. Our characters have a sense of freedom, yet somehow they feel confined by that freedom, with no purpose or direction given. The film deals much more in traditional psychological drama, involving isolation, ennui, and war factoring in on the protagonist's mental breakdown. Signs of Life may not be Herzog's strongest or even most complex film, but the way it plunges us into this arid, monotonous setting is something to acknowledge. Regardless of his shortcomings, Signs of Life is still a peculiar and unique Herzog film, and I recommend seeing his beginnings in this gritty and bizarre drama. I might as well mention this film. I wasn't sure if I wanted to because, well, I used to hate it. And now I don't hate it, I just dislike it. Yet I can see why people might be transfixed by something like this. The film takes place in the future, where everyone in the world is now a midget. The story is non-existent, but the film centers on a group of little people, who scamper around a building, getting into mischief, harming animals, harassing blind people, lovely stuff like that. This film managed to be both annoying and boring when I first watched it, which I guess is a feat. Nothing that happens is particularly funny, most scenes go on for way too long, only for the same gag to be repeated later in the film. The concept itself is so bizarre that I can understand why people are fixated by this film, not just for its nature, but its representation of societal collapse. This is a theme that Herzog will continue to explore in his later work. These characters have escaped the clutches of their tyrannical overlord, but what now? They have achieved complete autonomy, not just from authority, but from law, morality, and humanity. It's a sobering reality that complete freedom is just as chaotic as authoritative rule. I've become less harsh on this film in recent years, yet it's still not a film I ever want to revisit. However, I understand why others might. The film attracts viewers with this philosophy, and of course its unusual concept. A future where everyone is a dwarf is one of the most Herzogian things I can think of. The only thing more Herzogian than that is him promising to jump into a patch of cacti. After a few accidents on set, Herzog promised that if there was no more, he would launch himself into a spiky, thorny patch. Which he of course did. Herzog stated, "Getting out was much more difficult than jumping in." If you're more in tune with odd vibe movies, then you might mesh with Even Dwarves Started Small. But if arthouse jackass doesn't sound like your thing, then your patience with this film will be very short. An early example of Herzog's compassionate interest, Land of Silence and Darkness revolves around people who are deaf and blind. Primarily, Finny Straubinger, a deaf-blind woman herself, who takes up work in activism for people with disabilities like herself. The documentary runs on an extremely loose structure, with Herzog and his crew simply following the subjects around on their various activities. There's a little talking heads, due to circumstances, therefore it feels much more akin to a fly-on-the-wall, cinema verite style. Oops, Herzog's not going to like that comparison. It's also a rare documentary in which Herzog doesn't narrate, but does feature his trademark classical music from Bach and Vivaldi. The music helps to make these intimate, quaint outings more grandiose, to show the true power and beauty that comes from these moments. These people are still a part of human existence despite their limitations. We may get to experience things they never will, but they get to experience things we never will. Land of Silence and Darkness shows us a side we never considered, proving that all life is valuable. We can never quite get into these people's heads, but we see their reactions to what they encounter. These people are at a huge disadvantage, but they manage to maneuver and find joy in life. At times, the reactions are so unexpected, whether they be heartwarming or unusually profound. Unusually profound is a great term to describe Werner Herzog, someone who can find stories in unthinkable places and can extract humanity from covert regions. Land of Silence and Darkness is a wonderful little documentary, emitting pure humility in its charming day with humble and curious people. Feta Morgana would be Herzog's earliest effort and a form he would return to in the future, the experimental documentary. Herzog and his film crew ventured into the Sahara and Sahel deserts, capturing the land, life, and its inhabitants there. However, a basic documentary about the vast desert is far from what this film ultimately is. Feta Morgana translates to mirage, which is exactly what the camera captures. We see planes take off and land, seeming to disappear through the wavy void. We hear the voice of Lodi H. Eisner orating the Mayan myth of creation over shots of the landscape and its people. On top of that, songs of Leonard Cohen and various other artists will randomly play over the images. I know this all sounds like a lot of incompatible pieces, and it's hard to decipher what Herzog's intention was, as there was a lot of elusive factors to this film. Herzog later admitted that he didn't know how he wanted to use the footage until after shooting, so that explains why the subject matter seems unrelated to each other. His thoughts were perhaps hampered by the numerous difficulties his crew had while filming. I don't usually discuss behind-the-scenes stories, but with Herzog it feels appropriate. As a civil war broke out in Cameroon, Herzog and his crew were imprisoned, to which he was beaten and tortured. The cinematographer, Jörg Schmidt-Reitwein, had the unfortunate coincidence of sharing the same name as an outlaw, and was almost sentenced to death until the charges were cleared. The heat was brutal, and sandstorms and floods made some days impossible to film. Despite these serious setbacks, Werner Herzog and his team still took some incredible shots, and eventually created a euphoric glimpse into a realm of reality and myth. Sometimes the rhythm of the film can get uneven, and all the elements don't connect as finely as we might have liked, but what Feta Morgana still manages to achieve is that of an otherworldly experience. Footage from Earth doesn't feel like it's from Earth, or even our universe. It's a film about mirages, hallucinations, visions. What those visions' significance might be is interpretable, but serves as the faint hub linking this network. Strenuous efforts miraculously pulled through to make something more than worthy. It's honest and beautiful, with a tinge of cosmic fright, and earns anyone's respect for its labor of love, even if it's not for you. Herzog would eventually perfect this form of film later in his career, but as for now, it's a memorable and daring experiment from a mad genius. Take a trip to nowhere with Feta Morgana. Herzog's first smash hit that garnered him the attention he deserved from all over the world. Aguirre, The Wrath of God, is famous for the content itself and the notorious behind-the-scenes incidents. The film takes place in the 1500s, after the Spanish conquistadors, mind you, after they'd overtook the Inca civilizations. The plot features the army on a journey down the Amazon River to find El Dorado, the City of Gold. Of course, we know that the City of Gold is make-believe, and the opening text even tells us that the Incas made it up in order to hassle the invaders. From the beginning, the film affirms that this is a futile and doomed expedition, propelled by the zealously insane Lope de Aguirre, played by Klaus Kinski. Who is Klaus Kinski, you might ask? Well, he's in part one of the most relentless, vivacious, charismatic actors to ever appear on screen. In another, he was a hair-triggered, hot-tempered man who would often break into furious fits of shouting on sets, sometimes turning violent. On the set of Aguirre, the crew were already weary from their arduous journey, and Kinski's episodes of rage only struck fear in their hearts. So let's see here. We have a volatile man who shows no emotion but fury, and another man who routinely places his cast and crew in stressful situations. How could that possibly be a recipe that produces nothing but constant disaster? Needless to say, Kinski and Herzog didn't get along very well, their fights involving life threats on a few occasions. The two worked together 4 more times, each production anecdote being just as tumultuous as the last. But I understand why Herzog kept casting him. Kinski is perfect for the role of Aguirre, frightening and vicious. He's not a man, he's an animal that heeds no persuasion against his instincts. The film feels like a Scorsese picture, a modern warning parable in the realm of history, greed, and corrupt powers. The conquistadors have already taken over a new world, yet that's not enough. They want more. Stirred by a never-ending hunger that can never be fulfilled, this city of gold is symbolic of the imaginary maxim that they desire but will never reach. There is no pinnacle to greed, only the ever-flowing river of addiction. This carries on Herzog's recurring themes of impossible odds and the aftermath of anarchy and autonomy. Much like the dwarves' listlessness after their revolt, the conquistadors, after their victory over the indigenous people, have not stopped, but only drifted into madness, cruelty, and inhumanity. Addicted to their victory, it's a mindless drive toward the hollow pursuit of colonialism. Aguilé is one of the most obvious examples of Herzog's radical filming style. The way the cameras shakily move around the setting makes it feel almost like a documentary. It's one of the most realistic feeling fictional films you'll ever watch. The synthetic score actually heightens this sense, and feels like you've taken a portal back in time. Water and dirt will get on the camera lens and nobody wipes it off. It further puts you in this chaotic, grimy journey. Nothing is beautiful about this movie, yet you can't help to get sucked into it anyway. It is so relentlessly visceral that you have no choice but to appreciate it and become entranced by it. The film had no storyboards and very little of a script. The actors were given vague directions and told to improvise. Therefore, most of the movements you see and the lines you hear are all natural, spontaneously acted upon in the moment. Herzog wanted to mirror the expedition in the film by shooting mostly in chronological order, to authentically capture the growing madness, but also he likened the production trip to that of the characters in the film. To Herzog, filmmakers are modern-day explorers, risking their lives to discover the human soul, detailing their findings through celluloid. Therefore, Herzog's content is reliant on reality, but interprets reality through speculation. Aguilé the Wrath of God is a savage movie, from its opulent, harsh jungle to the unhinged primal yearnings, nurtured in man-like beasts. A visceral cinematic plunge into the most grotesque sects of humanity. You'll feel as if you were taken on the worst camping trip of your life. Aguilé is an essential film you should all watch at least once. A personal favorite Herzog of mine. The Enigma of Casper is based on the real-life story of the titular man, who allegedly lived the first 17 years of his life chained in a basement. He claimed to have no interaction whatsoever, couldn't walk or talk, and knew nothing about the outside world. The film follows his journey of being integrated into society, learning how to walk and speak, but also taking in the big wide world he's now a part of. Casper sees things in only the way he can see them, and fails to become normal. Throughout the film, many stuffy intellectuals make their way to Casper to flaunt concepts involving science and philosophy. However, they always end up stupefied by Casper's misunderstandings or skewed worldview. These scenes are infused with a gentle touch of humor and are guaranteed to put a smile on your face. It's a journey of discovery in the external world, but also one of self-discovery, as Casper takes joy in being himself. He sees the beauty as well as the flaws of the world, yet takes solace in his humble little life experience. It's probably the closest Herzog got to wholesomeness, although the film is still wrought with anguish, as Casper learns the world is not always a beautiful place. It's Herzog's retelling of Plato's allegory of the cave, brimming with truth, enlightenment, and a new perspective, not just for Casper, but for the audience. Perhaps Herzog sees a little bit of himself in this odd little fella, someone who thirsts for knowledge but has no interest fitting into some elite circle. The film cast Bruno Schleinstein as Casper Hauser, who is equally a strange man of his own. A street musician with no acting experience and mental handicaps, caught the appeal of Herzog, who thought his childlike demeanor would be perfect for the role. The film is therapeutic in that way, as two strange creatives celebrate their individualism and finding sanctuary in their ways. Funny, charming, compassionate, and disarmingly insightful, The Enigma of Casper Hauser is, as Charlie Chaplin said, a film of laughs and perhaps a tear. Another favorite Herzog of mine, due to the hauntingly transfixing atmosphere. Taking place in a Bavarian village, similar to the one Herzog grew up in, the master glassblower dies and fails to pass on the secret to anyone. The town's refined glassworks are the only thing it's known for, therefore a spiraling madness takes over the quaint village. If the cast looks half asleep, well, that's because they kind of are. In order to make the characters appear in a detached daze, Herzog hypnotized the actors, sending them into an ethereal darkness. It's that behind-the-scene neorealism Herzog does that might gain him controversy, but elevates his films to a dedicated, immersive experience no other films could even think of attaining. The actors all agreed to undergo hypnosis, so I don't consider this too controversial. It's a crazy but brilliant filmmaking choice that's exciting to read about and enhancing to watch. This has some of my favorite cinematography in a Herzog film. The images have a dreamy quality to them. Jörg Schmidt-Reitwein, having escaped Cameroon, captures lush, beautiful shots amidst mysterious landscapes. It's a film about end times. It at least feels apocalyptic, despite not taking place on a global scale. It's Herzog's recurring theme of anxiety for the future, the brooding question, what do we do now? He further elaborates on his obsession of collective madness, as an invisible fear ruins the entire town. One that feels motivated by man's psyche, yet in another sense feels strangely biblical. This town's sustenance and relevancy are fading into obsolescence, and that cloud hangs heavy in their skies. A crushing reality of unimportance ironically sobers up some of the townspeople, while the rest sink further and further into unattainable yearnings. Dreamy and nightmarish at the same time, a beautiful-looking but fear-invoking film. Heart of Glass will capture your subconscious in unexpected ways. Bruno Schleistein returns in Herzog's Ballad of the Bizarre Personalities. This time, the sad side of a Casper Hauser type. Strosek follows the titular Bruno Strosek as he and his two friends try to find a better life. Not prospering in Germany, the gang moves to America and strives to make a living there. Our protagonist's concerns aren't so much with living or success, but finding some deeper passion in their lives, a reason to live. The characters are too eccentric to be brooding about existence. Nonetheless, they bide their time by getting involved in bizarre interests such as street performing, animal magnetism, and chicken hypnotism again. As they carelessly indulge in their odd whims, finances get worse, breaking the group apart. Strosek is a social realist film that's more concerned with surreal comedy than social realism. Similar to how the characters focus on their own quirky whims, the film also avoids the plight of poverty until it's too late. As you probably noted, the protagonist has the same name as the actor, Bruno, similar to the other characters as well. Strosek is also an accordion street player, just like Schleistein. Herzog filmed on location, like most of his other works, and included a scene of auctioneers, figures who were present in the documentary he made about them. Strosek captures a sense of gritty realism about the fortitude of being a misfit. It's not easy, and in pursuit of individuality, you can often lose more than you gain. Strosek is unsuspectingly funny, but also a heartbreaking film. It's one of the oddest dramedies, polemic in both humor and melancholy. Strosek is a film unique as Bruno himself. The original NOS Fatu is a silent horror classic, and is a highly acclaimed film, especially in Germany. You know, he's NOS Fatu! Nearly 57 years later, the film was honorably remade by the one and only Werner Herzog. Herzog wouldn't be my first choice to remake the film, yet he adds some of his own unique ideas that make NOS Fatu a vampire film like no other. For those unfamiliar with the material, 1922's NOS Fatu, directed by F.W. Murnau, is a copyright-free attempt at retelling Dracula by Bram Stoker. The main spirit and plotline remain the same, but characters' names and other minor details are changed. One major difference is depicting the vampire as an explicitly demonic figure, as opposed to a deceptively astute gentleman. Klaus Kinski is a monster. Also in this film, he plays Dracula, stepping into the role originally played by Max Schreck. The film also stars Bruno Ganz and Isabelle Adjani, star of Possession. This time around, the filmmakers were able to keep the names of the original novel's characters, but decided to lift many contributions from F.W. Murnau's classic. Herzog does a splendid job at remaining faithful to the legacies of both Bram Stoker and F.W. Murnau's work. It's gothic and shadowy, but Herzog wouldn't be comfortable with a shot-for-shot remake. His filmmaking tendencies evoke an austere horror lurking throughout. Herzog has a fascination with the collective madness of the city in lieu of this threat of plagues and vampires. Similar to Heart of Glass, he insistently treats us to this deteriorating society, helpless in the clutches of the unknown. That's an element many forget about the initial Dracula story. Many of Dracula's opponents and victims had no clue what they were up against. From Van Helsing, to the village, to the crew of the Demeter, much of the dread came from the mystery of this intangible force of evil haunting the populace. Was it a disease, a devil, a divine punishment? One tidbit I should mention if you're seeking this out, is there's actually two versions of the film, one in English and one in German. Now, it's not uncommon for European films to have different dialogue tracks. However, instead of having actors dub lines in the sound studio, Herzog would film a scene in German and then film the same scene in English. This feels like another one of Herzog's frivolous exercises to make things more difficult than they need be, yet he thought dubbed lines would take the audience out of the illusion. Therefore, both language versions feel equally authentic, yet it's interesting how they're literally two different films. On the bright side, the film isn't too dialogue heavy anyway. Many scenes are filled with silent suspense, allowing the petrifying atmosphere to cover you. Herzog's use of classical music is odd as well, adding a juxtaposed sense of beauty to this horror film. Enduring this film feels purely gothic in an intangible, frightening way. Herzog may not be a horror film director, but if we're going to remake films, we need to get masters like him to do it. An artist who brings their own original ideas to the project, making it more effective beyond any other director's imagination. If you haven't seen the 1922 film, I recommend checking that out first. But if you're a fan of the Dracula story like me, you should have no trouble getting the most immersive effect you can out of Werner Herzog's NOS Fatu. One of Herzog's most, if not the most, notorious of his films, Fitzcarraldo is a cinematic legend. The film is the fourth collaboration between Herzog and Klaus Kinski, the latter playing rubber baron Brian Fitzgerald, also known as Fitzcarraldo. He plans to harvest rubber to attain his dream of building an opera house in Peru, but the land he wants to claim is inaccessible by boat. This, however, hardly heeds him. Here's the main hook and most infamous aspect of Fitzcarraldo. When Fitzgerald reaches the steep hill blocking access to the other river, he decides to portage the 320-ton steamship up the hill and down the other side with sheer manpower. And by manpower, I mean exploited indigenous people. That idea sounds preposterous on its own, but it gets worse. What elevates the insanity of this idea is that while filming, Herzog also transported the actual ship up the mountain. No miniatures, no effects, no tricks. Werner Herzog actually lugged a giant steamship up a hill using primitive technology. And by primitive technology, I mean primitive people doing all the labor. When you see teams of people hoisting this ship up a hill in this film, they are all real natives practically lifting the ship. It's all real. Its notoriety has made an unmissable mark in pop culture, but perhaps this gimmick precedes the actual quality of the film. Now, I'm not saying Fitzcarraldo was bad, and I wouldn't go too far in claiming it overrated, but much of the film surrounding the expedition is rather tame, especially for Herzog. I do admire the concept of a man passionate about art and wanting to share his love with the world, yet something about the pacing fails to capture my investment. The entire movie is 2 hours and 37 minutes, and it takes roughly an hour until we finally depart down the Amazon River. All the footage before that is quite frankly dull. By the time we board the steamship, the film gains some speed, yet the peak of the picture feels more like a publicity stunt than something conducive to the project. The behind-the-scenes tales don't help to justify this experience either. Kinski and Herzog, of course, butted heads constantly during production, but that hardly scratches the surface. There's a few injuries and even deaths of natives on set. Kinski claimed that he felt close with the natives. The chief, on the other hand, offered to kill Kinski for Herzog, who declined, saying that he needed him for the film. Herzog angered the natives more by building an encampment without their permission, inciting them to burn it down. A local woodcutter was clearing trees out of the way when a poisonous snake bit him. Having no time to retrieve the medicine, he cut off his own foot in order to save his life. The film took nearly 5 years to make. The film originally starred Jason Robards and Mick Jagger, who had to drop out of the film due to other commitments, as well as the unexpected longevity of the project. Therefore, all the footage shot in the mainland had to be recasted and redone. Fitzcarraldo is considered one of the most difficult productions ever concerted, although I believe Herzog was prepared for most things that happened. While I admire the dedication to realism, it does make you question whether it was all worth it. People have made sacrifices for great art, but in the case of Fitzcarraldo, the experience just isn't that effective to me. Herzog later claimed in a self-deprecating quip that he was king of the useless because of this film. So is this some kind of extreme performance art about ambition, ingenuity, and futility of human strife? Is it a maximalist representation of man's achievements throughout history compressed into a fictional narrative? Thematically, one can draw the obvious connection between Fitzcarraldo and Herzog's other works. It's an overly ambitious man facing impossible odds. It's human versus nature. It's stark realism bleeding through the celluloid. Fitzcarraldo seems to be the antithesis of Aguirre, even returning to a boat-driven plot in Peru. Herzog liked Peru. While Aguirre was powered by greed, Fitzcarraldo was driven by love. Entirely different motivations, but both equally zealous. In conclusion, the scenes involving the steamship, while controversial, are quite a spectacle. Personally, the rest of the film is not as exciting or engaging, and I wonder how revered this film would be if it weren't for its ostentatious set piece. But it's a monolith for radical, persistent filmmaking that anyone diving into film history must see. I do like the film and admire the character. I hope I'm not being misconstrued here. I just don't love it as much as the attention would expect me to. Continuing the theme of crazy dreams and crazier men, Fitzcarraldo is history, condensed in the microcosm of mankind's personal struggles and achievements. One of my favorite Herzog films is a rise and fall story, with an existential spin on the genre. Based on the novel by Bruce Chatwin, the story follows famous outlaw Francisco Manuel de Silva, aka Cobra Verde, from his start as a dingy homeless bandit to a lord of the Brazilian slave trade. Cobra Verde doesn't fall in the material sense, but rather he is struck with the cold realization that his achievements have not satisfied him. His occupation becoming obsolete, all that hard work and violence was to no greater progress for anyone. Much like Aguirre the Wrath of God, it's a condemnation of the futile efforts colonialism and imperialism boast about. Conquest at the expense of dehumanization and exploitation of other ethnic groups is not progress at all. It's progress for some, in exchange for regress in other civilizations. The film doesn't show much from the slaves' perspectives, yet it inherently sides with them by portraying the carnal violence as two sides piteously fighting back and forth. In this sense, Herzog emphasizes the barbarism behind the slave drive and objectification of human life. I can't imagine how anyone could exploit human labor for frivolous objectives. What kind of person would do that? Bruce Chatwin's novel is inspired by a true story, similar to the fictional narrative, involving the slave traders' alliance and rivalry with two African tribes. Cobra Verde makes and breaks relations with the Ghanaian people in order to attain control and profit. It sounds political, which it is, but it's also exciting. I love historical films centering on events rarely covered in media. We often look back on events in a black and white manner, but I'm drawn to historical films that explore dynamics, exposing all the intricacies of power and motives. These stories feel perfect for dramatization and nuance, yet they're tethered to reality and truth. Philosophical and historical, it's a testament to how Herzog examines the fundamental trappings of mankind with a singular story representative of all human history. Cobra Verde is intense, gritty, profound, and fascinating. This is another favorite Herzog of mine. I feel like I've said that enough already, but Lessons of Darkness reaches another level of filmmaking. His crowning achievement in experimental documentary, flawless in my eyes. This is one of those films that I can describe, but it's better to experience, as words don't convey the sublime energy it communicates. Lessons of Darkness features footage of the Kuwait oil fires that Herzog captured. However, rather than making a straightforward documentary on the disaster, Herzog played the footage and narrated from a fictional perspective of an alien visitor observing an apocalyptic wasteland, revisiting the framework from Feta Morgana. This sci-fi tone poem is carried by magnificent scores of classical music, evoking heavy feelings of awe, terror, insignificance. It's hypnotizing to watch scenes of fire blasting into the sky, often covering the entire frame. Intimidating black smoke plumes dwarf figures in frame and terrorize the barren desert. It's unnatural, yet strange enough feels majestic. The film is bathed in an enriching atmosphere that, despite the hellish images, is undeniably beautiful. Lessons of Darkness received some controversy, accusing Herzog of insensitively using footage of this disaster for an ostensibly science fiction narrative, but I don't think that was Herzog's intention at all. Herzog's films observe the madness of humanity, pontificating within a grand scale of larger chaos. Herzog has always been a somewhat silent observer in his neorealist films and documentaries. This is the first one where he emphasizes that role as a personification. To view our travesties from an outsider's viewpoint, it puts our follies into perspective. Humanity believes we are powerful, but this extraterrestrial perspective establishes just how foolish, pointless, and insignificant our endeavors are. Lessons of Darkness is nothing short of brilliant and simultaneously magnificent. Spectacular, arresting, transfixing, terrifying, awe-inspiring as it is awful. Cosmic like a Lovecraftian horror tale being told as a documentary. I love Lessons of Darkness. It feels like it took me to a higher plane, and will do the same for you. Herzog's most emotional documentary will no doubt capture your investment in this recount of brutal survival. This heart-wrenching documentary follows Dieter Dingler, a German-American whose dream since he was a little boy was to fly airplanes. Eventually flying during the Vietnam War, the film recounts his capture, imprisonment, and escape from the Vietnamese. One method the film employs is journeying back to the Vietnam jungle with Dieter Dingler in order to reenact his grave trek. What could potentially lead to PTSD actually becomes therapeutic for Dingler. It never felt like Herzog was exploiting his experience. You can see real compassion between the interviews and respect for his story. There's a couple other liberties Herzog takes, which he frequently does during documentaries, where he'll fabricate a certain minor exchange to enhance the emotional effects. Some might accuse this of being disingenuous, but Herzog wanted smaller details to have a lasting effect. Dingler orates his tale more than we see it, however, it still manages to be difficult and gripping. This is hardly a limitation, as the story can still get increasingly disturbing and hard to listen to for its subject matter. After this traumatic, life-altering experience, the film returns to its thesis. The title, Little Deeter Needs to Fly. All along, Dieter was still that boy who just wanted to fly planes, and he did. He achieved his dream at what might seem a great cost, but he did it, which is more than most of us can say. Herzog is not so concerned with Dingler's torture or even survival, but his accomplishments, his satisfactions, his current living status. He emerged through hell, this tumult undoubtedly changing him forever, yet there is ultimately triumph, humility, and inner strength now a part of his life. This is a highly sympathetic documentary, and one of Herzog's most affectionate films. You feel a real connection to Dieter Dingler over the course of the movie, and have a clear grasp on his spirit. It is sometimes an unsettling film, but one you will not regret experiencing. So please, watch Little Deeter Needs to Fly. And if you like this story, check out Rescue Dawn, Herzog's dramatization of Dingler's story, starring Christian Bale. One of Herzog's most indelible films, the 2005 documentary, Grizzly Man. The film is a biography on eccentric conservationist and bear lover Timothy Treadwell, detailing his lengthy stays in the Alaskan wilderness and his eventual death. Unlike many of his other films, Herzog doesn't travel to some intrepid area of the globe, but comprises the film through archival footage that Treadwell documented himself. The remainder involves interviews with friends of Timothy Treadwell and discuss his goals and what he stood for. Grizzly Man is solely a character study on the fascinating personality of Treadwell, unveiling in full view his admirable and unadmirable traits. Treadwell had many flaws, and the film never shies away from depicting them in their brutal honesty. For instance, he wasn't exactly an expert in this field despite how he may present himself. He was fairly naive, headstrong, and sometimes temperamental. However, Herzog finds a flame burning within the heart of Timothy Treadwell, one that may be misguided but is passionate and sincere. Perhaps Herzog became interested in Treadwell because he found a likely kinship in him. Two adventurers who will pursue their heart's desire at any risk, even death. If the cost of making your dreams a reality is your life, that's worth it as opposed to sitting around doing nothing. Containing emotional, educational, and entertainment value, Grizzly Man is often a funny film, usually coming from Treadwell's odd, spastic personality. Some awkward moments, lack of self-awareness, and ironic situations are guaranteed to make you chuckle. To clarify, these scenes all come packaged in the film with a beating heart. The movie is never making fun of Treadwell, but treats these moments with jabs of sympathy. Grizzly Man received high acclaim. It was called one of the best films of the year and is considered one of the greatest documentaries of all time. It's a deep, dissecting character study that is just as entertaining as it is fascinating. You can't miss the man and the film everyone fell in love with, Grizzly Man. Conceptually, this is perhaps the most basic of Herzog's documentaries, yet don't let that mislead you. Encounters at the End of the World features many of Herzog's unique insights, quirks, and fascination. We journey with Werner Herzog to Antarctica, covering the research facility town, their scientific endeavors, and the vast wonderment of this barren continent. It's no secret that Herzog loves to travel, yet this was his first trip to the icy landmass in the south. Many of us might overlook Antarctica for its lack of native dwellers, yet this means its mysteries are more bountiful. Antarctica itself is very much like Herzog's pictures. It can be desolate and threatening, but overall it's beautiful, awesome, inquisitive, enigmatic, grandiose, provocative. It is deceptively intimidating, but emboldens so much of humanity's primal history. On first glance, it would appear to be a film you watch in school, yet it's infused with a poetic outlook, and Herzog asks more questions than he answers. The film has a great rhythm, and feels like Herzog is just sort of filming each topic as he encounters them, and I believe this greatly benefits the film. The lack of pre-planning emphasizes the notion of exploration, and makes us feel like we're discovering this cold desert right along with him. My favorite moment might be the scene in which Herzog encounters a wandering penguin. I mentioned this scene at the beginning of the video, and I still don't want to go further into it until the end. To refresh your memory, a penguin is irrationally dead set on hobbling away from his flock and into the mountains on his own. This is extremely dangerous for him, yet the researchers have stated that taking him back would be pointless, as he would only run off again. Herzog becomes periodically beguiled by this aquatic bird, and dedicates some time to pondering his nature. The people residing in Antarctica are just as fascinating as the natural landscape itself. Herzog loved people, and you can see that in his many detours of individual stories. At one point, he interviews a woman who was imprisoned during the Civil War, something Herzog can relate to. But this has little to do with the driving idea. The film is even dedicated to Roger Ebert, who lost his ability of speech that year. Despite his sociopathic tendencies, Herzog has a heart, and you can see his lust for life and knowledge at the core of this film. Encounters at the End of the World is a simple yet profound film. It never ceases to provoke your mind with endless possibilities and dazzling discoveries. You will constantly be fascinated and amused by Werner Herzog's Encounters at the End of the World. I feel like I can't move on without mentioning this film. Bad Lieutenant, a loose remake of the 1992 film by Abel Ferrara, is outrageous, boisterous, and schlocky. Exploitation at its peak, starring the only man who could responsibly handle the precision, care, and subtlety of this role, Nicolas Cage. The filmmakers insisted that the only trait this and the 1992 film have in common is the name, and Herzog had never even seen the original film anyway. If you thought Herzog and Kinski was an unpredictable combination, just think of the levels of insanity these two madmen of the movies can reach. You may be wondering why Herzog would even want to make such a gratuitous Hollywood flick. Yet after you watch the film, you'll understand why. First of all, the film is encased in a sheath of irony. Every ridiculous Hollywood trope is amped up to such a degree that it must be self-aware parody. Throughout the film, Nicolas Cage not only has his reputable freakouts, but experiences various hallucinations from his drug habit as well, adding a sense of offbeat surrealism to this cop movie. It certainly achieves that level of unhinged excessiveness it wants, but if I can add a personal consensus, it's not exactly for me. I've never been a fan of exploitation movies, although I understand the appeal. Additionally, I've grown tired of Nicolas Cage in the past few years. His performances used to be a niche thing on the internet, but now Hollywood is trying to cash in on him, and it more often than not feels disingenuine, and for that it fails. I'm not saying that this film fails, in fact it uses him brilliantly, if not in a tongue-in-cheek way. Yet even disregarding studio ineptitude, I'm still not into the semi-ironic admiration others have for Nicolas Cage. Sure, it's funny, but I've never felt a longevity from his over-the-top performances in any of his films. Perhaps it's also the cop movie aesthetic that I can't shake, despite the fact this film is a mockery of the genre. Bad Lieutenant might not be everyone's cup of tea, but if it is, I think you were already hooked. I mean, what other movie would have gangsters, drug trips, iguanas, breakdancing, harmonica music, and that's all in the same scene? Subsequently, I think you'll have a good time with this then. It's mindless, chaotic, extreme trash with its tongue in its cheek and a wink to the audience. Another great example of Herzog exceeding requirements in an educational documentary. Cave of Forgotten Dreams finds Herzog covering the Chauvet cave paintings, the oldest surviving remnants of prehistoric art in the world. The film highlights some other relics, skeletons, the Pont d'Arc Bridge, and interviews with experts as well. As scientists study this ancient art, Herzog is not so much concerned with the what, but why. Much like Encounters at the End of the World, Herzog raises more questions than answers, and approaches the paintings from an existential perspective, rather than a scientific one. I love the conclusion of this film, featuring an alligator exhibit, wrapping up the study of the artifacts with a primordial metaphor. It puts modern human perception in a helpless and ineffable position, but never comes across as nihilistic or dour. On the contrary, Herzog celebrates the efforts of study and discovery as commendable searches for knowledge on a deeper and more complex level. We may never know the answers, but to remain stagnant is to refuse the ultimate human desire. The film was shot in 3D, which proved to be terribly difficult, but that's nothing Herzog can't handle. He initially didn't like the idea of 3D, however, his cinematographer, Peter Zeitlinger, convinced him that the textures of the cave and its paintings would become enrichingly detailed in this format. Herzog's crew was already limited to 4 people, including himself, which made handling equipment rather difficult. They had to stay on a narrow footpath, prohibited from stepping over and disrupting the preserved nature. On the bright side, this is perhaps the least difficult film Herzog had to shoot. Cave of Forgotten Dreams is a great film for history buffs, art buffs, or philosophy lovers. It's a basic premise that Herzog once again elevates to inquisitive peaks of pondering. It unravels the mysteries, both tangible and intangible, that exist right under our feet on the earth we live on. Cave of Forgotten Dreams will invite you to discover and then leave you asking more questions. This documentary covers the life, lifestyle, and work of ethnographer, traveler, and writer Bruce Chatwin. The film also dives into Herzog's and Chatwin's friendship and their mutual influence on each other's work. Chatwin, for example, was a consultant on Herzog's Where the Green Ants Dream, and wrote the novel Cobra Verde was based on. One segment features Chatwin's rucksack, which he lent to Herzog, who eventually used it in his film Scream of Stone. It is a merely personal item, but attributed with great significance through Herzog's lens. Bruce Chatwin was known for his nomad lifestyle, drifting and settling from place to place. Herzog tries to replicate this by venturing to the various places Chatwin stayed, gathering info on his studies and the nomad himself from the people who knew him. We see just how much knowledge meant to Chatwin, and his inclinations to study other cultures and other worlds. To expound his findings, both scientific and humanistic, to the rest of the globe. Chatwin and Herzog shared some commonalities in the way they viewed humanity's placement in time and space. Many facts come to light, but there are more poetic reasons that escape them. These are mysteries in which we may never find the answers, but they are worth pursuing. Nomad is a satisfactory biodoc and an earnest ode to a friend. Nomad, in the footsteps of Bruce Chatwin. Another testament to Herzog's ability for the heartfelt and the educational. Life is dangerous, but Herzog is interested in those who are brave enough to take on life's challenges and pursue their instincts. The Fire Within, Requiem for Katya and Maurice Croft, is a tribute to 2 volcanologists who were known for capturing stunning footage of volcanoes. The scientists in love would tragically lose their life to a volcanic eruption in Japan, with 41 others in 1991. The film touches on some of their studies, but if you want to see a documentary focused more on volcanoes, check out Herzog's previous Into the Inferno. which briefly mentions the crafts. Here, Herzog is interested in Katya and Maurice more as filmmakers than he is scientists, and much of the film is comprised of the crafts' own footage they captured from research trips. Initially, the crafts used cameras as merely recording tools. However, they soon got bit by the cinematography bug and became addicted to capturing great disasters and dangerous spectacles. Over time, we can see how their footage evolved not just from volcanoes, but the regions and people who live there. It's a biodoc that doesn't explicitly spell out the craft's life and characteristics, but the intuitive footage they shot tells us much more about their souls and their affinities. We can see their compassion for others, and their commendable risk for being as intimate with the earth as possible. The documentary features many patches of atmosphere containing solely earth-shattering footage accompanied by classical music. It falls somewhere in line between Lessons of Darkness and Grizzly Man, part mesmerizing and part biography. Volcanoes are a great representation for how Herzog sees nature. Unpredictable, looming, indifferent, and deadly, yet also immensely complex beyond human comprehension, which is amazing and bewildering. There's a sense of divine power that comes from these natural wonders, and anyone brave enough must confront the sheer magnitude of the world's core. It's easy to see why Herzog would connect with the crafts, despite having never met them. We may think of scientists as timid nerds buried in books, yet science lovers like the crafts or Herzog knew the secrets of the universe and refused to submit. It was released the same year as another documentary about the crafts, Fire of Love, which is still a good documentary in its own right, but as you would expect, Herzog brings a level of transcendence to his project, one that venerates the crafts, while also reminding us that they were only human. It achieves a level of grandiosity, but never falls into hegemony. An explosive and moving tribute. The Fire Within. Requiem for Katya and Maurice Croft. Few filmmakers can claim the determination that Werner Herzog has in scale, methods, and concepts. The feats he's accomplished are astounding, and it's a wonder he's even still alive. Herzog explores cultures, places, and ideologies we would have otherwise remained unaware of. Herzog will take a familiar story or topic and expound his own philosophy and viewpoint from a simple idea. He was not only educating others, but expressing himself, and his visage of our placement in the universe. He began from the humble, and made it gloriously complex and fascinating. Herzog has gained a notorious reputation for being the madman of cinema, and it's easy to see why. He is ferociously ambitious and considers little of the consequences, but those don't matter to him. As long as he explores new places and contributes to the humanities, he is content. For a crazy man who sometimes cares little about others or his own well-being, there's a sense of beauty emitting from Herzog's work. Perhaps it's beauty from the raw truth, or the profound lines Herzog delivers to us, whether directly or implicitly. Herzog is bound to his voice, and doesn't retreat for anything or anyone. Maybe that's the raw beauty we pick up on. The beauty emitting from the sincere passion of this guerrilla filmmaker, doing what he wants, no matter what. This is why I think almost every Herzog project is worth visiting at least once. He's so relentlessly devoted to his productions, you will always be watching a vigorous Herzog film. Roger Ebert said, even his failures are spectacular, and I have to agree. Herzog is such a fascinating individual, it's impossible not to grasp at least a portion of his exuberant spirit, even in the least of his work. If some project falters, it maintains dignity in its intensity and sincerity. Thrusting himself into all his work, even his lesser films contain a morsel of intrigue. There are so many Herzog films I would have liked to include but couldn't. Bells from the Deep, Wheel of Time, Wings of Hope, Where the Green Ants Dream, Invincible, Into the Abyss, Herdsman of the Sun, Echoes of a Somber Empire, Meeting Gorbachev, The Wild Blue Yonder. If I've learned anything from Werner Herzog, is that the world is a never-ending sandbox of curiosity. There's always something to learn or discover. Some of it is hard or frightening, but other times it is majestic and beautiful. It's simply the way of nature, so we might as well accept it, admire it, and examine it. Many artists aren't too interested in the scientific world, yet Herzog examines this field and relates it to our own contemplative existence. Whether he's exploring the inner depths of the human psyche or the outer reaches of the vast universe, Herzog is a seeker of knowledge in every way. Werner Herzog is still alive and miraculously still kicking. He makes new films very frequently, his recent work including Theater of Thought or Family Romance LLC. He'll most likely keep making films until the end. Despite his ostentatious reputation, he is a much admired man and very well respected in multiple fields. Those who have met him describe Herzog as kind, a bit odd, but mostly interesting. He's made numerous amounts of friends across his long career in life. Herzog ran his own film school for a short while, teaching the principles of filmmaking, but also teaching students how to pick locks, forge documents, and borrow equipment. That's how he got started, so it makes sense that other scrappy guerrillas should do the same. Herzog believes that filmmaking isn't something you can teach, and it's something you must do. Herzog was never taught filmmaking, he just simply played by his own rules and did it. Herzog has acted in numerous media you may not expect to see him in, such as Jack Ryan, Parks and Recreation, Rick and Morty, The Simpsons, even Star Wars, despite having never seen a Star Wars film in his life. Jealous. Herzog has also admitted to watching trash TV, saying you can't learn anything from good movies, only bad ones. Herzog has watched WrestleMania, Honey Boo Boo, and Keeping Up with the Kardashians. He once saved actor Joaquin Phoenix's life after a fatal car accident, and then fled the scene. He was the subject of a short film titled Werner Herzog Eats His Shoe. The title is pretty self-explanatory. After losing a bet in order to challenge fellow documentarian Errol Morris, Werner Herzog indeed ate his shoe. Life to him is not struggle, but adventure and opportunity. You may remember at the beginning of this video, I brought up a rogue penguin from Herzog's Encounters at the End of the World. A funny little guy who journeys on his own into imminent danger. The director takes a keen fascination with him, and it's not hard to see why. This penguin is Herzog. He sees himself in this Arctic adventurer, a restless soul who must venture into the unknown, even if he encounters death. For remaining idle is true death. This is a common device Herzog uses for his subjects, that of danger, or rather, danger being a supplement price for enthusiasm. Life can be wanton, and the path to our dreams is difficult. Despite these immovable, immortal obstacles, we cannot stop, and the best of us don't. These are the beings that Herzog finds kinship in and celebrates. The Little Penguin, Bruce Chatwin, Bruno Schleinstein, Dieter Dingler, Timothy Treadwell, Finney Straubinger, Casper Hauser, Fitzcarraldo, Katya and Maurice Kraft, you cannot stop. Don't worry about the consequences, for being a part of this massive story called existence is enough for any human soul to ask for. Herzog acknowledges that nature and the world are impossible to conquer, and that life is cruel and nihilistic. However, that's no excuse to give up. Herzog admires people like himself who are still crazy enough to take on the world and life's challenges. It's so impossible that it's insane. Yet that makes insanity one of the most beautiful human traits of all. Natural in the purest and primitive senses, and startlingly brilliant. A passionate and daring explorer through his camera. The writer, traveler, and thinker for the eccentric technology age of the 20th century. The cinematic adventurer, Werner Herzog. Thank you all so much for watching Kinotherapy. Please check out Werner Herzog's films. You are bound to like something in his oeuvre. Leave a comment, start a discussion, let me know what your favorite Werner Herzog film is or what your thoughts are on this director. Like, share, subscribe, thumb the bell. Be sure to follow me on Letterboxd where I write individual reviews. Every time I do a director video, I review the individual films I talk about or some that I don't talk about, and I go further into detail on them. I delve into much more of a rich analysis on there. And I've been posting them on YouTube as well. So if you want to find certain reviews for films that you're interested in, then definitely go through my YouTube channel, go through the posts, and try to find them there. I have a second channel called Video Portraits. This is my channel where I kind of do video diaries, or just filming mundane things that I see in my life. I also take video portraits of myself, or sometimes other people. This is sort of my experimental filmmaking channel. I'm not really sure what exactly I want to do with these videos, or what direction I want to take them in, but I feel like just posting these videos, just raw, unedited, unfiltered, well, mostly unedited, I feel like there's beauty and truth to be found in that. The kind of beauty and truth that Werner Herzog would want you to look for. Like not being completely factual in your documentaries, or bending reality, or shifting scenes. Maybe your audio equipment's screwed up, so you have to film in a different spot now. but you can haphazardly tie that into the director you're talking about documentaries and realism and truth. What was I talking about? Oh yeah, my second channel, video portraits. Check that out if you want. Again, not entirely sure where I want to take that into, but some pretty cool stuff on there if you're interested. I just got a Patreon as well. I figured that if you like my channel and you want to support me, I would absolutely love that. This is not my job. I just sort of do this for fun. But if I could make this more like a job, I could see how many people are really watching and are really dedicated to this channel as much as I am, as well as maybe getting some ideas of what direction to take this channel in. I truly appreciate each and every one of you who tuned in and watched this video. Please keep the art of cinema alive, and happy viewing.